What is going on, guys? So today I actually want to continue our little quest in doing our beginner's guides for Genshin Impact, and today specifically I want to go over probably what is the most important thing about this game when it comes to surviving, when it comes to dealing damage, when it comes to how this game became what it is. Truly comes down to the elemental systems that are in place. So before we get into anything, you may be asking, why do I even care? Like, why should you even listen to me? So I've been playing since launch pretty much. I'm AR 41, which is, that's pretty good. That's not the highest in the world, of course. There are people out there pushing 50. They're really, really close to 50. Apparently, it's statistically impossible to be 50 as of this recording, which is Thursday, November 5th at 12:14 a.m. But pretty cool that it's statistically impossible. If that is true, then there's not a level 50 out there. But AR 41, which means that I have put quite a bit of time into the game, and I may know a thing or two, and hopefully that's what you will get out of this today, is just a thing or two that you may not have known, because you probably will know a lot of what we're going to talk about, but my goal is to hopefully teach you something that you don't. So in the world of Genshin Impact, there are 7 different elements that can be found throughout the world in various different forms, and you can use them in various different ways to interact with the world in a lot of different ways. So the first one that you'll probably ever come in contact with and become more acquainted with is going to be Anemo. The Anemo element is basically going to be a wind element. So all of these kind of have their own little name, but they all associate with what we would have in the real world. So Anemo is the first one. There is Geo, which is like an earth element, I guess. And then we have Electro, which is lightning. We have Dendro, which is the nature element, or kind of like the grass element. Then we have Hydro, which is the water element. We have Pyro, which is fire. And then we have Cryo, which is frost. So in the actual game, if we go into our characters here, we actually can see that each character has a little symbol above their name. Jean is an Anemo character. Fischl is an Electro. Zhengling is a Pyro. Noelle is Geo. And then we have Kaya, who is a Cryo. But you'll notice we actually do not have any Dendro elements. Currently, as of 1.0, there are no Dendro elements in the game. There is supposed to be, possibly. It's kind of a rumor / leak kind of thing. Don't know if this is 100% true, but we should be getting one in 1.1 or very, very close to 1.1. So anyways, with all 7 of those elements, they basically are going to fuel the kit of the character in a lot of ways. So pretty much every single character has an elemental skill and an elemental burst. So just take, for instance, Jean here. In the very bottom right hand corner, we have our E ability and our Q ability. And you'll notice that they do actually have the Anemo color, the kind of like tealish green kind of. If we switch over to Fischl, you'll notice that we do have an E and a Q as well. Those are both colored purple for the Electro element, and then Zhengling is going to have red because she is actually Pyro. So they all do kind of coordinate in some way. If we actually use one of these, let's actually go back to Jean for a second. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to activate her E ability. Her E is her elemental skill, and I'm going to kind of do it from the side. So hopefully you can see this. You'll see she kind of throws out a big burst of Anemo damage. So she throws out a big clump of wind kind of thing. She just tosses it out and it does some damage. Now, the actual skill, if you are interested in any of the skills that you currently have on your characters, can just be found under the actual character card here. Go under details, and if you go under talents, you can see this is your normal attack, this is your E ability, and this is your Q ability. So you can always do those if you want to check those out. We did a whole character guide where you can go through, and we talked about how all of those interact with each other and what they actually do and stuff like that. So next we have our Q ability, and because the way that Q abilities work, they do take energy to recharge themselves. You can't just use them. They're not on like a basic cooldown. You actually have to use like energy to restore the ability to use it. Plus there's a cooldown. So we're only going to get one shot at this, but we're going to hit Q. And you'll see Jean throws out this giant AoE kind of like thing where she's actually healing members of the party. And once an enemy crosses over that line for the AoE, it will actually do damage to them, and it does Anemo damage. All right, so you can kind of see like each character's elements kind of like go along with their elemental whole kit. Like that's kind of what makes the game in itself. Since that is kind of the gist of like characters and how characters use their elements, there's a whole nother world when it comes to elements that makes this game very interesting. So as you can see here, we do have an elemental reactions chart. So one of the coolest things about this game is that whenever you combine two elements, they have a reaction together. And if you played any kind of RPG that, you know, uses similar systems, this will kind of come pretty natively to you. I myself played a ton of Pokemon growing up, and because of that, I kind of have some like familiarity with combining elements and stuff like that. But this game is a little different. It's not like your typical water puts out fire, you know, fire melts ice. It works very similarly, but it's not quite as you would expect in some cases. All of these elemental reactions apply both directions. Whether you are affected by pyro and apply electro damage, or if you are affected by electro damage and apply fire, it all works the same way. They don't have to necessarily be one or the other. That's where it kind of tripped me up in the beginning, because from my experience, fire will always melt ice, which is still true, but if I use ice on an enemy affected by fire, it will actually still trigger the melt, which is interesting. When it comes to combining elements, there are a couple of easy ones that we can go over. The swirl effect is pretty simple. Basically, you're gonna combine Anemo with Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro. And what that will do is it will create a swirl effect, causing the enemy to take swirl-based damage. So in the actual chart here, it says swirl absorbs the first element it becomes in contact with, and it deals elemental damage, effects begins, and generates further elemental reactions. So long story short, what that means is if you come across an enemy that is affected by pyro, meaning that the enemy is currently either on fire or is just burning in some way, and you use an attack that has Anemo attached to it, it will actually cause swirl damage and mix in the Anemo and the pyro damage. Same thing goes for Hydro. If you come across an enemy in the rain and they are wet, then you can apply Anemo damage and it will swirl together and do swirl damage. Same thing goes for Cryo and Electro as well. So pretty interesting, and it's very, very, very cool to try to do these combinations. So next we actually have Crystallize right underneath Swirl. So this one is talking about Geo and adding it into the same four elements: Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro. So reading what the chart says, crystallization generates elemental shards, providing a corresponding elemental shield. Elemental shields absorb all damage for a specific amount. It is effective against corresponding elemental damage, yet vulnerable against opposing elemental types. Crystallize is going to be when you use a geo-based attack on an enemy that is affected by any of the four elements that we previously mentioned, and those two elements reacting to each other are going to spawn a small shard that you can pick up to gain a shield from that element. So if you use a geo-based attack on an enemy in the rain, it's going to crystallize that Hydro element into a shard. And when you pick up that Hydro element shard, it's actually going to give you a Hydro-based shield. So this can be kind of helpful to tank extra damage, to kind of prevent extra damage from coming in, but it also can make you quite vulnerable. As it says in that last sentence, it is effective against corresponding elemental damage, but it's also quite vulnerable against opposing elemental types as well. So if you have a water shield and somebody uses fire against you, it is going to cause Vaporize, which we'll get to in a second, which could be bad. Last but not least, on the bottom left-hand corner there, we do have burning damage, which deals ongoing pyro damage for a duration. Deals ongoing pyro damage for a duration. Now, this one's kind of probably the most self-explanatory one. If you're a grass element, if you're affected by grass in some way, then fire burns you. It's pretty self-explanatory. Next, we actually have this giant wheel on the right-hand side. So this looks really complicated at first, but it's actually pretty simple. So basically at the top, we have our fire element. Now, there are three directions that we can go here. If we use fire on an element that is affected by Hydro, this is going counterclockwise from 12 to about, what, 8 o'clock? So if we use fire against a hydro affected enemy, it's going to cause vaporize damage. Vaporize will deal additional elemental damage, however, also dissipates when the effect occurs. So if you use pyro attacks on an enemy that is affected by water, like an enemy in the rain, then it is going to remove that wet status from the enemy, but it will cause the vaporize damage in the process. Next, we actually have fire against electro. So going straight down to the center of the clock from the 12, we actually have overload damage. So if an enemy is affected by electro and you use fire against them, it will cause overload damage, which creates an explosion that deals pyro AoE damage and will break geo shields, which is very, very nice. You're going to come across a lot of enemies in leeway, which will have some type of geo shield or something like that, and claymore users are really good up against those, but if you don't run a claymore user, then overload is going to be your best friend. Next, we actually have melt damage, which is when you combine pyro with an enemy that is affected by the cryo element, you're going to trigger melt, and melt is going to actually melt from a cryo or pyro attack, dealing increased damage. So most of those kind of make sense. I mean, in the real world, if you add heat to water, it is going to eventually boil and vaporize. If you add fire to ice, it is going to melt away. So that kind of makes sense. And I guess when lightning strikes, it creates fire. So that's kind of how I remember overload anyways. So let's actually move straight down into the electro. So the electro is kind of in the center of the wheel here. We've already talked about overload, of course, but when you combine electro with an enemy who's affected by hydro, it's actually going to electro charge them. So it's going to actually deal ongoing electro damage for a specific duration. That kind of makes self-explanatory sense. You know, if you throw a toaster in the bathtub, next we actually have electro and cryo. So this is going to be when you combine an electro attack against an enemy that is affected by cryo. It's going to cause superconduct, which actually deals cryo AoE damage and reduces the target's physical defense. So that's actually pretty interesting. When it reduces their physical defense, it's going to set you up to do a little bit extra damage, and that's always very welcome. So then last but not least here, we actually do have the frozen condition, which is when you combine hydro and cryo together, it's going to freeze the target and they will become immobile. Shatter is actually also triggered by dealing heavy attacks on frozen targets, like using a claymore, plunge, or any kind of geo damage. So shatter is very interesting because shatter is it's kind of like a status where it's going to reduce the amount of physical resistance that you would have for like a certain duration as well. So this all looks pretty complicated, but I promise once you get into the game and just start messing with these, all of this will soon be super easy to understand. Next, we should probably talk about debuffs. So what actually happens when you are affected by one of these 4 elements? So you can't be affected by Geo, and we don't have Dendro, and you're not really affected by Anemo ever. So what happens when you're actually affected by one of these 4? Well, if you're affected by an electro attack, if there is a Hilitroll that snipes you with a bow and arrow that is electro charged, and you become engulfed in this storm that is electro, you are going to have the debuff called Engulfing Storm applied to you, which will continuously drain the character's energy recharge. So when you're going to use those Q abilities, you may need to grab some extra energy because you're going to slowly be draining it away. Now, if you're affected by hydro, you're going to be under slowing water debuff, which actually is going to increase the skill cooldown duration. So after you use that E or that Q ability, the cooldown on that may be bumped up quite a bit, which is always frustrating. Next, we actually have Smoldering Flames, which is when you're affected by Pyro. So this is going to continuously inflict Pyro damage over time onto the character. So you will slowly take small chunks of damage as you are slowly burning away. And then last but not least, we do have Condensed Ice, which just actually increases the party's stamina consumption. So whenever you go to dodge or sprint or anything like that, it's going to actually increase the amount of stamina that you're using to do so, which is super annoying. I think the last and probably coolest part about the elements whenever it comes to this game, I personally enjoy team building. I enjoy putting together unique teams and how things work together and stuff like that. So it actually does matter what elements you have on a team. There are small little bonuses that you will get for choosing specific elements on a team. So if you actually go into party setup, you can just go over here, hit party setup right there. Once you get in here, if you look at the top right, there is elemental resonance. So this is a pretty interesting thing that you can kind of modify and change around. Under my webcam here, you can see that it says current party elemental types. When you have a full party, you will receive elemental resonance effects that correspond to the elemental types present in the party. And then it basically just shows you that I have Hydro, Pyro, Anemo, and Electro in my current party. Now, since I have 4 unique elements, it actually applies this specific elemental resonance effect. So what it's going to give me is an effect called Protective Canopy, which means I have all elemental resistances raised by 15%. So if you guys watch how characters work and stuff like that, whenever we went under their attributes here, if you go under details, you'll notice that I have 15% pyro resistance, hydro resistance, dendro resistance, yada, yada, yada. The reason is honestly that simple. It's because of the resonance that I have within this team. So because everything is different, it actually just applies that effect. So combinations that you can use. Now, I'm assuming, and I hope that they actually change these up in some way. Like if you have 3 of a single type, like maybe it's going to do like even more. Maybe we'll see in the future, but currently it is only when you have pairs of elements in your party. So if you have a pair of fire elements, it is going to give you Fervent Flames, which means you're actually going to be affected by cryo for 40% less time, and it's going to increase your attack by 25%. So that's actually pretty big. The fact that you can increase your attack just by having 2 fire elements is pretty awesome. Next, we have Soothing Water, so affected by pyro for 40% less time and increases incoming healing by 30%. Next, we have Impetuous Winds, which decreases stamina consumption by 15%, which is amazing just for exploring. That's another thing. You get these just throughout the game, like for just having this party set up. Your party is now affected by these passives. So while you're exploring, having 2 Anemo characters just decreases stamina consumption by 15%, and it's going to increase your movement speed by 10%. And then it also shortens the skill cooldown by 5%. So you get like a couple of different things just for having 2 wind characters, which is super cool. Next, we have High Voltage, which is 2 Electros, affected by Hydro for 40% less time. Superconduct, Overload, and Electro Charged have a 100% chance to generate an Electro Elemental Particle, which is going to have a cooldown for 5 seconds. Let's get through our last 2 really quick, and then we'll come back because I got something to show you with High Voltage. So Shattering Ice is when you have 2 ice elements, so affected by Electro for 40% less time, increases crit rate against enemies that are frozen or just affected by cryo by 15%. And then last but not least, we have Enduring Rock, which increases resistance to interruption. Now, that kind of sounds weird. What is interruption? So you know how whenever you're like doing an elemental skill, or if you're using your stamina to, perform some kind of a continuous attack, like if you have a claymore user, you can spin and do that stuff. The interruption is whenever you like get hit with something and it just completely interrupts that attack. So kind of interesting that you can, prevent that from happening, less often, I guess. When protected by a shield, though, it also increases your attack damage by 15%. And since you're running Geo characters, you're probably going to have elemental shields on quite often. So that's actually pretty nice. Oh, by the way, really quickly, you can see if you go in here, it shows you that High Voltage is activated. It also doesn't matter if we do 2 Geo characters here. You can see we can stack these. So it's not like you can only have one. You can stack them and do however you want to do it. Now, coming back to High Voltage. So this 100% chance to generate an Electro Elemental Particle. What we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and just pop this Q ability right here really quick. And we're just going to get rid of it so that I can show you the energy gains that we're going to get. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to knock this Hilitroll off this tower. And we need to kill him with either overload, superconductor, or electrocharged. So what we're going to do is we're going to let Zhengling take over, and we're going to let Oz take over. And you'll see overload pops up. And it was really, really fast. But did you see the electro orb that came and shot onto Fischl here? That is what that's referring to. Now, the thing that I really wanted to point out is if you actually have if you're picking up an electro particle and the character that you currently have is electro, that character is going to get a bonus. Now, someone in the comments, if you know this, please let me know, because I'm not 100% sure. Everyone in the party is going to get the energy when you pick up these elemental orbs and particles. But does it actually add the bonus to Razor in my situation, even though he's not currently active on the field? Or does that bonus only get applied to Fischl because they're both electric characters? The base energy recharge should go to Zhengling and Noelle just fine, but since it's an electro particle, it should actually charge Fischl more. Does it also charge Razor more? It's a question. Hopefully somebody can enlighten me, because I don't know. But yeah, so that's basically the gist of elements, guys. They're probably one of the coolest things about this game. It's one of the things that got me kind of like super interested to begin with. There's just like so many combinations that you can do, and so many cool different like reactions that can happen. Like, I don't know, it's just really interesting. So that's actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed the video, you know, glad you did. Hopefully you've learned something today. If not, then you're just Mr. Smarty Pants, aren't you? If you do have any further questions, you can definitely drop a comment down below. If you want to chat live, if you have a bunch of questions and you'd rather just chat live about it, I do stream on Twitch, trying to do Tuesdays and Thursdays as my consistent schedule right now. So yeah, you can hop over there and we can chat about it. But until our next video, I'm gonna go ahead and head out. See you guys later.